Okay, now, in the previous chapter, we talked about voice leading and we talked about root tone motion, and we discussed rules or guidelines for root tone motion when the root tones are moving in seconds, and also for when the root tone is moving in fifths. So we never talked about when root tone motion was in thirds, and now that we've got secondary chords, we need to talk about that as well. So here's the rule. For chords that are moving by the root tone motion in the third, retain two common tones in the same voice, the same voices that is, and move the remaining pitches to the closest tone that will complete the chord. So actually, root tone motion in thirds is quite easy if you can locate the two pitches that are the same from one chord to the next. So here's an example. First we have a 1 chord going to a 6 chord. So I'm going to just do this quickly on the keyboard here. Here's a 1 chord, C, E, G. Here's a 6 chord, A, C, E. For simplicity, I'm going to take that one and bring it an octave lower. And you can see that there are two pitches that are the same, which we already discussed, between the 1 chord and the 6 chord, the C and the E. So as you can see from the example, you locate those pitches, the C being in the tenor and the E being in the soprano, and you leave them in those voices when you go to the next chord. And then you really will only have one note, the alto, to move, and of course the bass pitch will be the root tone of the chord, as we've been doing all along. Just look at one other one here. This is the 4 chord going to the 2 chord. Here's the 4 chord. Here's the 2 chord. You can see there are two pitches in common, the F and the A. So watch what we did here in the voice leading. We found the F in the alto and made it stay the same. We found the A in the soprano and had it stay the same. And then to progress, all we had to do was take the bass and move it to the next root tone of the 2 chord, and we had to take that tenor and move it up a step. So you're ready to go ahead and check your understanding 8.1, where you get to try this rule of retaining two common tones whenever the chords are moving by the root tone motion of the third. Let's talk about a deceptive cadence. Let's quickly remind ourselves of the cadences that we have so far. We have authentic cadence, that's 5 going to 1. We have the half cadence, that's anything as long as it ends on a 5 chord at the end of the phrase. And then we also have the plagal cadence, which doesn't often stand on its own, but we've seen it and heard it. That's the 4 chord going to 1. So we're going to talk about a deceptive cadence, and that is the progression 5 going to 6. It can be either in a major key or in a minor key. So the way to think of this is we already talked about the fact that the 6th chord is a secondary chord, and we've already put it in the category of tonic. So if a 5 chord goes to 6, it really is like dominant going to a secondary substitute for the tonic. And if you find it at the end of the phrase, it gives a really special kind of a non-final cadence. Because we're really expecting the 5 chord to resolve to 1, it's actually quite surprising if it resolves to 6. So for this reason, we call it the deceptive cadence. So here's an example, 8.7. It's the hymn tune, Faith of Our Fathers, and it sounds like this. Did you hear that little cadence at the end? Did it deceive you? We may have expected the piece was going to end like this. To a 1 chord. But instead, listen to the last measures. There's the sound of 5 going to 6. Now, measure 3 of this example presents a few concepts that we really haven't learned yet. The 2 chord here is inverted. It's in first inversion. The 3rd is in the bass. And we'll get to that. We'll get to learning how to write that as well. Of course, when we write our chords, we're doing them all in root position. Also, look at the 5 chord. On the end of the 3rd measure, it's not a triad. It's got 4 notes to it. And we call it a 5-7 chord. because the distance from the root tone to the highest additional pitch is a seventh. We'll be covering that in later chapters as well. So in other words, we're in the key of G, and we're playing the 5 chord, but we're adding an additional note. So it's what we call a 7th chord, because the distance from the lowest to the highest, when in this close position, is the interval of the 7th. Again, we'll be covering that a little bit later. But we've got a really nice example here of a deceptive cadence. Now, if you move from 5 to 6 in a major key, just follow the rule of root tone motion in seconds. The bass is moving up by a step, so move the upper 3 voices contrary to the bass. However, unfortunately, the voice leading of a 5 going to 6 in a minor key is going to present some problems in the voice leading. Let's take a look at an example. Here we are in the key of C minor. And in this example, you can see a 5 chord, which is G. Here it is, it's G, B, D, but I've got it voiced like this. And we're going to go to a 6 chord, which is an A flat chord. Now, this is not good voice leading. Even though I took the upper 3 voices and I had them move contrary to the bass, I got a rather peculiar interval that I'm asking my soprano to sing. So that's the augmented melodic interval is awkward. It's an augmented second. And the leading tone, which is the B, it is in an outer voice. And in this position, it really wants to move upward. Whenever you put a leading tone of a key, remember in the key of C minor, so that's the leading tone. And whenever that's in an outer voice, like a soprano, it really wants to go up. It doesn't want to go down in a different direction. Okay, so you should try to follow their natural tendency. So we may have to voice lead this a little different than the rule that we learned. Watch this. It's the same chord. And I'm going to resolve it. That works a little bit better because the leading tone is going up, but we still have some problems. Look, we have parallel octaves. The G's and the alto and the bass of the first chord are going to A flats, also in the alto and the bass. And we have parallel fifths. Notice between the bass and the tenor is a perfect fifth in the 5 chord, and moves again to the bass and tenor to a perfect fifth. So this is a hard little progression to actually do a good job of voice leading with. Here's a third try. 5 going to 6. Sounds like this. Seems like we've solved a lot of the problems here. So we have the octaves are not there any longer, but and there's no more parallel octaves, no more parallel fifths. But one of the issues that we have here is a funny little tritone that appears in the tenor voice, going from the D to the A flat. So we're having trouble with this chord, trying to come up with a solution. So I'm going to give you the solution, and you don't have to worry about all of these issues that I've pointed out. My point here is to show you that if you don't follow this special voice leading rule, you're going to have a lot of errors. And if you do follow this rule, then these errors will not crop up. So here's the solution. When you get to the 6th chord, don't double the bass like we usually do. Instead, double the 3rd of the chord. So take a look. That's the best solution. The doubling is irregular, but we've resolved the leading tone correctly. We've avoided any kind of augmented 4th interval in any of the voices, and we don't have any forbidden parallel motion. So you have to memorize this rule. It's just a really special rule, and it only crops up when a 5 chord goes to a 6 chord in a minor key. And when that happens, double the 3rd of the 6th chord. You can do this by resolving the leading tone up by a half step and then resolving the other voices down contrary to the bass. So go ahead and try that. This is Check Your Understanding 8.2.